6:52. We have visual confirmation of the target. The target at this moment does not appear to be doing much. Uh-oh. I think he notices us. Get out of here! Get out of here!
Hello friendos, this is Chain, welcoming you back to Chain of Commander, and for today's episode, I'd figure I would take a gander at what I consider to be one of the most underrated mechanics to come out of recent years, and that would be Surveil.
Hey, it's Chain here, not in the studio right now. In fact, I'm recording this from my family room because between when I recorded primary footage for this episode yesterday and the time that it's going live today, Wizards decided to spoil the new Dakon Planeswalker for Modern Horizons 2. And if you take a quick gander at it, you'll notice that its primary loyalty ability, its +1, is to Surveil 2. That's right, Surveil appears to be back for Modern Horizons, and I am super pumped for it. However, that does mean that some of the things I'm about to say in the video might be a little bit dated and are very quickly going to change in the near future. For the time being though, definitely just be excited with me while we expect the return of Surveil, and let's take a fond look back at some excellent Surveil cards printed up to this point.
Surveil is from Guilds of Ravnica, only Guilds of Ravnica, as Dimir's signature mechanic. It's essentially very similar to Scry, but in Scry you would put the cards at the bottom of your library. For Surveil, you put them into the graveyard instead. Now, this is really one of my favorite mechanics of all time, despite how recent it was, because it is not a win con. It is simply an engine to help progress your deck's game plan. In fact, I have a deck entirely built around Surveil as its primary mechanic, where I delve into other mechanics such as Delve to do the winning for me, and it's an absolute blast of a deck despite it being so incredibly janky. Now, the benefits of Surveil are pretty straightforward. A, it helps set up your draws, sets up the top of your deck, just like Scry would. But unlike Scrying, it also helps fill your graveyard. So decks that are going to want to play Surveil as a mechanic are things like Arumi of the Dead Tide, Muldrotha, Sidisi, Brute Tyrant, any of the Lazavs. It's, just general graveyard shenanigans want to help fill their graveyard, and Surveil is a nice passive way to do that. Now, before we get into this list of what I consider my top 5 favorite Surveil cards, I simply ask, if any of these cards seem like something you want to build with, definitely consider using that TCG Player affiliate link in the description below. It won't cost you a single cent more, but it will help out the channel. That said, let's jump right in to this list. Starting us off here at number 5, we are looking at Price of Fame. Price of Fame is 3 and a black for an instant. This spell costs 2 less if it targets a legendary creature, destroy target creature, and Surveil 2. This is essentially a reverse cast down, which itself actually came from the Doomblade line of 1 and a black to destroy things conditionally. However, unlike cast down and Doomblade, this can actually kill anything, albeit maybe for a different price. First, cast down. Cast down is 1 and a black to destroy target non-legendary creature. Price of Fame costs 1 and a black only if it targets a legendary creature, but that doesn't mean that you can't destroy non-legendary creatures with it. You just need to pay a little bit extra. Luckily, we are in a format literally built around legendary creatures. So while this card in Standard may not have always had a cheap target to target, in our format, it's going to be pretty common to have a legendary creature on the field that you're going to want to get rid of. So quite often, you'll be able to spend a single generic mana in black to destroy somebody's commander and potentially set up your next 2 draws with the Surveil. And that is a decent rate for mana usage. At number 4 here, we have our first and only split card on the list today in Connive and Concoct. Connive is 2 and 2 hybrid Dimir mana for a sorcery. Gain control of target creature, power 2 or less. And Concoct is 3 blue-black for a sorcery. Surveil 3, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. This spot on the list was competing with another split card, Discovery and Dispersal, for this particular place on the list because I really like both of the cards. But when it came down to it, I had to look at which side that actually surveilled was the side I liked more. And in the end, the reanimation of Concoct beat out the cantripping of Discovery by a very narrow margin. Now, being able to reanimate a creature for 5 mana may seem a bit expensive, especially when compared to much cheaper options like Animate Dead or Reanimate, but at the cost of the extra mana, you do have a little bit more flexibility to work with. First, you Surveil 3, then choose, all as part of the spell resolving. So if you were to say put this on the stack, your opponents can interact with what you already have in the graveyard, but as soon as you start surveilling, if any of those top 3 cards are something you want to reanimate, you can just put it into your graveyard and bring it back without having a possibility of any of your opponents interacting with you at all. People who play Tayam Luminous Enigma are fully aware of that little bit of a safety net involved, that even if somebody were to exile your graveyard with this spell on the stack, you would still have the possibility of being able to get some amount of value out of it. Second, Concoct is stapled onto one of the coolest and very flexible spells, Connive, that can steal your opponent's creatures. And in our format, there are so many great creatures that you could be stealing with that power 2 or less. Steal your opponent's Solemn Simulacrum and get the card draw off of it. Steal their Beast Whisperer and start casting creature spells and drawing cards. Steal Archmage Meritus and start casting spells and drawing cards. Or just steal your opponent's Seedborn Muse and start untapping every turn. So many options, which makes this split card a very, very flexible tool in a lot of decks. Alright, at number 3, we have our first creature of the list in Dream Eater. Dream Eater is 4 blue for a 4/3 creature Nightmare Sphinx. It has flash, it has flying, and when it enters the battlefield, Surveil 4. When you do, you may return a target non-land permanent your opponent's control to its owner's hand. Now, when you talk about those type of cards that just seem to do it all, Dream Eater is really right up there. It has flash, making it an instant speed interaction. It has fly, giving it evasion. It surveils 4 on enter the battlefield. This is the largest surveil instance currently printed on the card. There are no other 4s. There are no other larger surveil numbers. Surveil 4 is the most you're going to get at this time. And get this, it's unconditional removal, bouncing any non-land permanent your opponent's control at instant speed. Instant speed removal on a big fat body that can potentially set up your next 4 draws. I have never not enjoyed casting this card. I really, really like it. And you know what else I really like? I would like it if you would show appreciation. If you've been enjoying this list so far, definitely consider hitting that like button in the corner. It means a whole bunch to me. That said, let's move on to number 2. Alright, here we are at number 2, and can you hear the doom? Well, you bet you I can, because number 2 is Doom Whisperer. Doom Whisperer is 3 black for a 6/6 creature Nightmare Demon, has flying, has trample, and then has an activated ability of pay 2 life, Surveil 2. Now, back in the day, actually not too long ago, I'm thinking back to M15, your big fat black beaters normally would have an amount of downside to them. Like, look at Abyssal Prosecutor. This thing literally says you can't win the game right on it. But clearly this design of black having a drawback is just completely out the window with Doom Whisperer here. Let's look at Doom Whisperer here. 6/6 for 5 mana. It's got that. Flying. Got that. Trample. It's got that. Being able to only need to pay life to surveil. Listen, in a format that starts at 40 life, in black, which is known for being able to gain large chunks of life at a time with things like Grey Merchant of the Asphodel, This thing is essentially a repeatable Limb Duel's Vault, being able to set up your draw every time you're going to draw a card. You'll almost always have the answer you need, always have a card you're looking for, always have action, because you can just dump the unwanted stuff into your graveyard. This thing is an absolute beast. Though not literally. It's literally a Nightmare Demon. But even so, it's still not my number one. Now, before I get to that number one, I do have two honorable mentions here, and these are honorable mentions because they themselves don't surveil, but boy, do they love it when you do. First up, we have Blood Operative. Blood Operative is 1 black for a 3/1 Vampire Assassin. It has lifelink. When Blood Operative enters the battlefield, you may exile a card from a graveyard, and whenever you surveil, if Blood Operative is in your graveyard, you may pay 3 life and return it to your hand. Longtime viewers of this channel might be fully aware how much I love Graveyard Hate, and I love Graveyard Hate like this even more because it's incidental Graveyard Hate. You don't need to sacrifice a whole slot in your deck solely to hate on graveyards. This guy can slowly pick away at individual cards in people's graveyards as the game goes along, and it's recursive, so you can keep bringing it back over and over again, assuming you have a reliable way to surveil. And a cool interaction with this guy here is that if you go to surveil, and one of the 2 cards that you are surveilling, or one of whatever, however you're surveilling, is Blood Operative, you can put it into your graveyard, and then after that's done resolving, the game goes to check, okay, did you surveil? Yes. Is Blood Operative in your graveyard? Yes. So even if it is one of the cards you have surveilled, you can then pay the 3 life to put it back to your hand. And that is value. The second one I have here, this might seem kind of high on the jank meter, but boy do I love it, is Disinformation Campaign. Disinformation Campaign is 1 blue-black for an enchantment. When Disinformation Campaign enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card and you draw a card, and then whenever you surveil, return in Disinformation Campaign to your hand. This card is the epitome of grindy. Honestly, it would be legitimately terrible if it was, say, a target opponent had to discard a card and you draw a card, because then it comes out to kind of be a wash. But since it's each opponent, that means you're -3 in the table, you're +1 to replace the Disinformation Campaign, so essentially you're coming out flat when you cast it the first time, but as soon as you bounce it, and it's back in your hand, that's like a free card draw. And then you get to go cast it again. And then every subsequent card you draw, every subsequent card you make your opponent's discard is just more and more value. This guy plays super well with Doom Whisper, where you can just pay life to surveil so you can keep bouncing this back to your hand and just casting it multiple times in a turn to represent a huge swing in resource acquisition. I just love the jank. I love playing this card. It's an all-star in my surveil deck, and that's why it got an honorable mention. Now, before we hop in to my very favorite surveil card, I do ask, if you've been enjoying the list so far, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button below. I do top 5, top 10 lists like this quite frequently. I just have deck text, general chit chat, and even some of those YouTube short comedy skits people have been enjoying these days. So I'd definitely love it if you hang out with us going forward. That said, we do have one last card to talk about here, so let's just jump on into it. Alright, it is time for my number one, my personal favorite surveil card, and it is Mission Briefing. Mission Briefing is blue for an instant. Surveil 2, then choose an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn. If that card would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. Let me tell you about this card. I love this card since the very moment it was spoiled. Essentially, when this card was first spoiled, its immediate comparison, legitimately so, was to Spellcaster Mage, a spell or a creature that had flash and would allow you to give any instant or sorcerer in your graveyard flashback. However, there are some major differences between Mission Briefing and Snapcaster Page that makes it a little bit more relevant in our format. First, similarly to the aforementioned Concoct, the surveilling and the choosing of the card is all part of the same resolution. So even if somebody were to say nuke your graveyard when you put this card on the stack, any of the cards you surveil can still be chosen as the instant or sorcery you want to cast. Also, this allows you to pay alternate costs of spells from your graveyard. Snapcaster Mage would give the spell in your graveyard an alternate cost equal to its regular casting cost. This just lets you cast it, which means for things like Cyclonic Rift, which has Overload as its alternate cost, you can now overload a Cyclonic Rift from your graveyard with Mission Briefing. And that, oh, yes please, just overload Cyclonic Rift from the graveyard. Do it twice, at least, yeah! And lastly, unlike Snapcaster Mage, which cannot be imprinted on Isochron Scepter, Mission Briefing can be imprinted on Isochron Scepter, which means you can do it again and again and again, getting extra value out of all the cards, all the instant sorceries that may end up in your graveyard. So that's it. That is my personal favorite, super flexible, super useful, lovable Surveil card of all time. And at this point, I want to hear from you folks. What are some of your favorite Surveil cards, or do you not care for Surveil as much as I do? Which I don't blame you. I might be a bit off the deep end. Definitely let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear it. Beyond that, I thank all of you for joining me for this episode today. I love it when I get to talk about weird, stupid stuff like this, and I hope you like it when you listen. So, thank you very much for joining me today, and I'll see you guys again in the future.